Thank you very much, Chairperson. The presentation is on. And thank you very much for the opportunity that you have afforded us to come and share our ideas in this webinar. Well, on the screen there, you can see the presentation outline. I'm not going to go through that because the outline is in terms of the questions that we were requested to respond to. Then the next slide, go to the other slide. It's on the introduction. Just by way of introduction, we are highlighting the importance of career development services, and in doing so, we are locating it within the broader HRD strategy of the Republic of South Africa. But we are also highlighting the key objectives or outcomes of any education system, which is to equip learners with knowledge, skills, and values for self-fulfillment and active participation and contribution to the socio-economic growth of our country. And we also highlighting the fact that it is critical for learners as early as possible to be exposed to these career development services so that they can ultimately articulate smoothly from the schooling system into higher education and into the world of work. Can you go to slide number 3? In slide number 3, this is where we are reflecting on the impact of COVID-19 on basic education. And colleagues, there's no doubt that the pandemic has had both positive and negative effects on education in general. And on this slide, we are showing, we're starting with the positive effects. In slide number, in this slide, bullet number 1, we are highlighting the fact that we have seen an increase in public awareness of the importance of in-class learning. Because as a system, we strongly believe that our strength is in the classroom. And I think the pandemic has really been able to heighten that. We have also seen an increased awareness of the need for blended teaching and learning using multimedia platforms, be they digital, terrestrial, broadcast, and in contact, type of platforms. With the limited time that we had to finish the curriculum, the pandemic has been able actually to expose us, to expose the inefficiencies in the schooling curriculum. It showed us, it actually reminded us that the curriculum is overloaded in terms of content. And as a result, it created the need for us to reorganize the curriculum and to trim it in order to promote deeper learning. And there is also a whole of society approach that we have seen really playing out during this period, where parents, where communities were working together in trying to address some of the challenges that confronted us. The last bullet there is about, the positives in terms of home learning as well as self-directed learning, which are critical elements of lifelong learning. So out of this pandemic, there are those positives that have been realized, and as a system, we'll have to see how we heighten them such that we are able to move forward. The next slide depicts the negative effect of the pandemic. There's a picture where we are showing at the center that the major contributor was the disruption of schooling. And as a result of the disruption of schooling, we experienced loss of teaching time, we experienced limited contact in respect of teaching and learning. We also experienced teachers and learners with comorbidities whom we had to accommodate. We had to come up with guidelines to guide on how teachers who are teaching from home can navigate that space. We also had to develop guidelines to support learners who are learning from home. But also importantly, the inequalities that were illuminated by the pandemic also showed that there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of, ICTs, in terms of the capacity of senior management teams at school level to be able to really manage this unprecedented context that we find ourselves in, and also in terms of basic services. I mean, we were so exposed that we noticed that there are a lot of schools that still do not have running water, that do not have sanitation, and so on. And that had a huge impact on, the environment that we found ourselves in terms of safety and issues of, hygiene. We were also exposed in terms of infrastructure limitations because of social distancing requirements. As you would know, we even had to make it a point that we resort to rotational timetables because our classrooms could not, take the usual number of learners in the classroom. So as a result, we really found ourselves in that situation. Psychological challenges that were brought about by the trauma, anxiety, and uncertainties that teachers, learners, and parents went through. So these are some of the negative impact that we had. And on top of this structure, we do have how measures that we put in place in response to this the negative impact that we have just highlighted. For instance, we were forced to find innovative ways of dealing with the situation, such that resorting to e-learning and also making it a point that we rely on research to inform whatever measures that we put in place. And we are also forced to strengthen our stakeholder collaboration. I mean, during that time only, we managed to meet with a whole lot of stakeholders just to make sure that everybody is on board. And I'm not going to go through all of them. The next slide speaks to the implications of COVID-19 on access to career development services for learners. When you look at the bottom, I started with limited access to curriculum, and due to prolonged and intermittent closing of schools, this made learners to have limited access to curriculum, including the curriculum for life orientation and life skills, in which career development is mainly embedded. This was further compounded by the fact that we had to trim the curriculum and also had to resort to rotational timetables, meaning that the teaching time was further limited. Colleagues, the issue of social distancing and lockdown regulations made it almost impossible to access these services through co-curricular activities, such as your career expos, your open days, your visits to workplaces. It really became almost impossible. And another issue is the transition from the schooling to PSET institutions and the world of work. And the transition was also disrupted as a result of the inadequate preparation of grade 11 and grade 12 learners to make informed choices about their future. Progression into PSET and productivity in the labor market was also compromised due to high projected retention and dropout rates. Reports that we are getting from provinces do indicate that, of course, we will be experiencing, high retention rates as well as high dropout rates for the first time in the schooling system. Access can be promoted through online resources. This is what we are saying, that digital learning platforms, virtual career expos, and open days, which of course currently are accessible to a few privileged learners. But we are saying that with strong partnerships with other departments, with other government entities, with donor agencies and civil society organizations, I'm sure we can be able to really reach out to these learners who are in those areas that do not have the necessary technological infrastructure. Obstacles for these services due to the pandemic threats. We have highlighted there that due to COVID-19, we experienced the issue of the number of teachers and learners with comorbidities who had to be home instead of being at school. We also experienced inadequate instructional teaching time, as I indicated. There was also a lot of uncertainty about the future prospects, and definitely this has had a negative impact on our learners who are supposed to be exiting the schooling system, including those who will remain in the schooling system. Lack of technological infrastructure, as I indicated, it also became an impediment for us to be able to leverage on digital platforms. Limited exposure to these services, especially your core curricular activities that I alluded to earlier on. The trimming of content to focus on the core fundamentals also really somehow became an obstacle. Can we go to the next slide? As I indicated, focus An emphasis on core content coverage was an impediment, limitation to remote learning relating to access, social exclusion, and perpetuating injustices of the past, thus leaving the poor and underprivileged behind. And we have seen also widened digital divide, and that creating a gap in education quality and socio-economic equality. The next slide, colleagues, is on opportunities for South Africa in response to the pandemic. I'm starting with the first one on top of the bulb. And we are saying that the context in which we are, difficult as it may, presents us with an opportune time to rethink and review our career development services policies in the basic education sector. But it also implores us to use innovative delivery modes. For example, visual platforms that we can use. We can also use simulations as approaches to strengthen access to these services. And due to job losses and high rate of unemployment, which have been engendered by COVID-19, we need also to strengthen or to accelerate the initiative that has been that is currently being implemented by the Department of Basic Education on the 3-stream model, so that we also strengthen our vocationally oriented programs to try to address the skills mismatch that we find in the labor market, of course, in support of the decade of the artisan. And in as far as the curriculum is concerned, we are saying that going forward, we want to take the opportunity of ensuring that every teacher becomes a career development ambassador, and which gives us the opportunity to move towards careers across the curriculum approach in order to provide a coherent and meaningful career development services for all. And we also want to leverage on collaboration and partnerships in terms of existing programs. For instance, we do have an existing program within the DBE, which we call EQT, which is Education, Employability, and Entrepreneurship. So we also want to leverage on that, and also to use other existing structures such as your QLTCs to support and sustain career development services, and to make them as much accessible as possible. In the next slides, colleagues, I'm just showing pictures of some of the things that I've spoken to. For instance, the slide that is flighted there is more about, how we can begin to use online platforms to enable learners to access education, including to access your career development services. The next one is also about, coding and robotics, how we can begin to use artificial intelligence, how we can begin to use, computational thinking and so on. I was even saying that during COVID-19, especially when we were still under lockdown 4 and 5, we could have actually made use of artificial intelligence to drop off some of our printed materials to libraries and to our learner homes and so on, and using, your piloted drones to do that. The last photo there, photograph there is more about, partnerships and how we can begin to strengthen collaboration and partnerships, even in terms of delivering on career development services. Can you go to the next slide? Then the next slide is on, can you just go to the next one? Existing threats for career development services delivery during pandemic. And this will be mostly a repetition of what we have already spoken to. We spoke about the content which was compromised due to the reduction in the teaching and learning time, and the fact that we had to resort to rotational timetables where learners are not going to school on daily basis. And inadequate preparation of grade 11 learners for higher education and the world of work, we've already indicated that. Insufficient support for our grade 11 learners to make informed subject choices, social distancing and lockdown regulations, disrupted core curricular approaches to career development services delivery. Teachers and learners with comorbidities might be left behind, and therefore, creating a lot of learning losses. Lack of sufficient psychosocial support services is also an issue, and limited access to these resources due to lack of technological infrastructure. The last but one slide, Chair, is on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the country as a whole. We know, for example, that we have experienced job losses due to the pandemic, and that has led to, the triple oppression of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And we have also experienced a severe contraction of the economy, but we have also seen new types of jobs emerging from COVID-19. And we have seen the new normal in terms of remote working and lockdown regulations, and possible increase in school dropout rates. I wanted to mention this. And also an upsurge in social ills such as your gender-based violence, crime, as well as corruption. In conclusion, Jay, I just want to reiterate that career development is therefore not only a private good of value to individuals, it is also a public good of value to society and the country. And therefore, we need to make sure that we continue to provide these services despite these challenging conditions that we find ourselves in. COVID-19 pandemic has created a greater emphasis and awareness of the importance of a comprehensive career development services program. And as we know, the implications of the pandemic on the world economy and the new normal has created the opportunity for new and emerging careers to arise sooner than later. Chairperson, I have come to the end of my presentation, and once more, let me thank you for indulging me. Thank you, Chair.